Yeah. Put your hands together to welcome the panelists Surjit, Bhalla and Debjani Ghosh. I'm sorry, Chandra, could you join them on stage, please?
The most important person that was.
Good morning, everyone. We have a really difficult job on stage today because this is a session immediately after Sadhguru and Ranveer Singh. I'm not sure if we can dance for you at the end of this. But what I can promise you is some very sharp insights on the state of the economy, on jobs, on what India needs to do to march towards that $5 trillion mark. And the government, in fact, recently said it's going to be, 10 trillion by 2030? So who better than a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council to take us through that? Thanks so much, everyone. Dr. Bhalla, PM Modi first made this statement on marching from fragile 5 to a 5 trillion economy. In fact, he was talking about it at an event of the Economic Times. And if you look at India's share of world GDP, it's gone up from 2.4% in 2013 to 3.1% in 2017. What will it take to touch the $5 trillion mark?
Actually, as it happens, not much at all. Let me just explain the simple math to it. We are at something like 2.8 trillion economy today. So if we grow at 12% nominal, then, and the exchange rate stays the same, we'll easily be at 5.6 trillion in the next 6 years. You add to that one historical fact, and that is that the currencies, remember this is in dollars. So the currencies of developing countries, especially fast-growing developing countries like India, or China before, or Indonesia, etc., their currencies tend to appreciate, means become stronger over time, very gradually, because the central bank chiefs of these countries, including India, intervene to prevent too much appreciation. The point I'm making is that, look, it is very reasonable to expect that the rupee, which is today at 69 or so, would be something like 63, 64 in the next 5 years. That gives you an additional 10%. So we don't need to grow at 12%, we need to grow only at 11%, nominal, mind you. And so therefore I think, the getting to a $5 trillion economy is, if I may say so, a done deal. That's not the real big question. There are other big questions, but I think a $5 trillion, but look, we never thought this was possible 10 years ago. That's how much things have changed in India, or 14 years ago when we really started expanding. And one thing on the currency, which we should all remember, what I'm saying over here, is that we had the highest growth rate period, 2004 to 2011, when the economy grew at 8% a year, real, and inflation was about 5%, that makes it 13. And the exchange rate stayed exactly the same, at around 45 to the dollar. So what I'm saying is that it is not only not unthinkable, it's really a done deal.
But in terms of the challenges, I mean, we are in an election year. You saw the no confidence vote yesterday stretched to 11 p.m. Should we wait for any other reforms till 2019, or is it going to be in a state of limbo?
No, you're absolutely right. This is an election year, and you have to wait for more reforms. And I think more reforms should be forthcoming. Much more reforms are needed. It's not as if, the interesting thing about the Indian growth rate is that we're growing at 7% or 7.5%. And then people say, listen, aren't we growing too fast maybe? Because you look at the rest of the world. And the thing about growth is that it is always relevant to look at where you are with respect to the potential that you can grow at. So our potential growth rate is higher than 7, and I would place it somewhere around 8.5, 9. What that means is a lot more needs to be done in order for us to be able to grow at 9, and that is more reforms. One of the areas in which I think significant reforms are needed and hasn't been done, and I think the Modi administration tried first few steps in that direction, is agriculture. We have not, throughout our history, starting with the 1991 reforms, we have sort of either taken agriculture for granted or felt that it was not really necessary to transform the agricultural workspace. Most countries, agriculture is the first area that they go into and reform. We didn't do that. That is what remains. And I think the next big set of reforms in India will have to be, regardless of who comes to power, will have to be in agriculture.
Right. Debjani, I want to take it to you. There's no doubt that on the reform front, the government has executed some game-changing ones in the last year. You've had GST, you've had the bankruptcy code. Of course, there are questions, on what else needs to be done. GST is still going through some changes. Even as we speak, there's a GST council meet in Delhi today to discuss rationalization of rates. But what are the micro challenges towards this $5 trillion figure? Are there structural issues? Is there a mindset issue? How would you look at this?
So I think, Mr. Bhalla, you said it, right? 5 trillion is a possibility. It's absolutely a possibility. I think the question which has to be, I don't think it has to be debated, but it has to be decided on is by when. It's definitely going to, if organic growth happens, I think by 2026, 2027, we are anyway going to be 5 billion. Now, is there an opportunity to fast forward? And if yes, by how much can we fast forward? It is 2 years, 3 years. There are, as we think through these, there are a few factors that come into play, right? First is globalization. Today, it's not just, the countries are not just connected to each other. We are very dependent on each other. What happens to India and how fast India grows is, unfortunately, not going to be dependent 100% on India. It's also going to factor in what happens to China. It's also going to factor in what happens to US, right? What are our relations? What are our trade agreements? What kind of partnerships do we have in place? It's going to factor in a lot of these. So globalization today has to be thought through as we are thinking through this plan. The second is digitization. Technology today is pretty much driving changes across. There is no business that is not touched by technology. There is no government that is not touched by technology. There is no nation that is not touched by technology. So how do we leverage the power of technology? You talked about agriculture. I think one of the places where technology can create the maximum impact is agriculture. And my little understanding of the economy, there are, I think if I break it down and I look at what's needed for us to get to that 5 trillion or get that boost needed to get to 5 trillion faster, services has to double. It's 1.3 today, it has to go minimum to 3. Manufacturing has to more than double. It has to get to 1 trillion at least. And agriculture, which is today less than $500 million, it's around 500 or 300 billion, if I'm not wrong. That has to get to at least $1 trillion. So that's where you need a massive boost because it's more than double. And that's the role technology can play, right? But then, how do we create the environment? How do we create the policies? Because we are talking about very disruptive technology.
That's right.
Is India ready for disruptive technology? Is our regulation ready for disruptive technology? Are we willing to change regulation to bring in that technology and absolutely unleash innovation? So there are a lot of thoughts that has to go in as you think through technology. It's not just a matter of let's adopt AI, which is what I keep hearing, right? You have to really think through the framework. The third thing...
And do you think that intent is there today based on your interest?
Of course the intent's there. Of course the intent is there. Everyone wants to do it. Everyone wants to see the benefits. Everyone wants to see the growth. But it is not an easy job. It is a tremendously challenging job. And you add to that the complexities and the diversity of this country, it gets even more difficult. So there are two more points I want to touch on, which I think are absolutely critical. I think the third one to me, which is critical for success, is inclusion. And India cannot keep that topic under the table. It's not a feel-good topic anymore.
When you when you talk about inclusion, do you mean the wealth creation has been unequal, or are you talking gender? If you can give
everything.
Us everything.
Everything. I mean, urban, rural, gender. Pick your favorite one, and you will find that there is a huge disparity. Wealth, pick your favorite, right? But if I'll take the one that I'm closest to, which is gender. I mean, there's the famous McKinsey report that calls out that just improving the inclusion of women in the economy, the participation of women in the economy, will give India a boost of 770 billion by 2025. We cannot not afford to take the benefit of that. We have to get that. We have to figure out how to make inclusion happen. And I think the last one for me is frankly the one that scares me the most, and that's the mindset. Yes, I've lived out of India a large part of my life, but I also have spent a lot of time in India. I think we make brilliant plans. We are tremendously good in strategizing. Honestly, we have some of the best plans and best strategies. Somewhere we lose the plot when it comes to execution, especially when I'm talking about execution at scale, mass execution, which is the kind which will be needed. What can we do, and can we really, and as Sadhguru said in the last session, we are a democracy. It's about the numbers. 2-3 people at the top cannot do this.
Right.
We have a prime minister who gets it, but he alone is not going to be able to do it. How do we mobilize this entire nation and the demographic dividend, as we call it, the advantage that we have of a young nation? How do we mobilize that to drive this change? I mean, those are the 4 things that I think are going to be critical to get right.
Right. So Bhalla, would you agree with Debjani's last point that, it's not a strategy problem. We have the blueprint, we have the reforms, but it's an execution challenge. It's a mindset issue, and how does one really get around that in a federal setup like India?
No, absolutely. I completely agree, but I want to emphasize the following. Last time my DNA was tested many times, it comes out as ++. So I've been accused very fairly of being too optimistic. But let me state there are a couple of things that have happened, and which means that we really don't have to do that much in order to achieve our potential. And that is the following. First, and it's interesting that this is to management graduates. One of the biggest fault lines in India has been the mindset, and the mindset that says that making profit, or profit is a 4-letter word. That is what I grew up with. And until very recently, that is what everybody else was growing up with. So one of the things, and whether you attribute it to leadership or globalization, or do attribute it to whoever you want, profit is no longer a four-letter word in India. The second very fortuitous development that has taken place, and we've come to the party a bit late than other developing countries, and we can talk about why we came to the party a bit late, is education. The kind of educational expansion that has taken place in India over the last 10 to 15 years is absolutely unprecedented. And where has the biggest educational expansion taken place? For women. So we are now approaching 2018 and beyond with the most educated labor force that we've ever had. And second, and if you look at it, the actual average educational attainment is going to be about 10, 11 for the new generation. Second, women are forming a larger and larger part of that labor force and that productivity which was mentioned. So we think that we need leadership in order to change things. You do. But some things are there in the process. Some things are there inevitable. And that's where my optimism comes in. The train has left the station. We are going to be a rapidly changing, a rapidly growing economy for the next 10, 15 years. And you don't really have to do anything. By that I mean that the pressure from the emerging middle class, from the middle class, etc., will be there for policy changes. So those policy changes, like I mentioned, whether it's in agriculture or some other areas, will have to come about. We have to, how long can India be a society that, or polity, that thinks that Air India should be run by the government? I mean, someday this has got to end. And I don't think that day is very far off.
Right. If I just, have a follow-up for that. You spoke about increasing participation of women in the workforce. I don't think participation has been an issue. What's really been an issue is, do they stay in the workforce? Because if you look at overall stats, the percentage of women in workforce has actually declined in the last decade for various reasons. That's one. And the second, you're very optimistic about growth, but one question that people keep asking is, where are the jobs? And we get different data sets from different agencies, and each one keeps trolling the other on Twitter. But maybe you can tell us, where are the jobs? And beyond Pakoda on what's happening there?
Let me take the first point, which I think is very important, on the labor force participation rates of women. Now, it so happens that I've been involved in a few academic papers on the subject with my wife, who's a sociologist and who deals with these questions on a daily basis, if you will. What has happened is, in this transformation that India is going through, that the first stage of the transformation was people moving out from absolute poverty to the emerging middle class. Now, so there are more people going into the emerging middle class, and as you go into the emerging middle class, one of the first things that happens is that the women withdraw from the labor force. And withdraw from the labor force because they sort of, whether for stature reasons or whether the family is now comfortable, income satisfying model, you can have various theoretical explanations. That stage is now over. The emerging middle class is rapidly declining, and the middle class is rapidly going up. The middle class has got education. The women have got education. Look at what's happened to Saudi Arabia. The women there no longer want to sit at home. This is the pressure. It's not the king suddenly came and was benign and suddenly started changing the laws in Saudi Arabia. There was pressure. There was pressure from the women. So once you get educated, then there's no holding you back. And that is beginning to happen over here. So the labor force participation rate, that is why I'm so optimistic. The labor force participation rate amongst women is going up. One little statistic on labor force participation. How do you measure? The way you measure labor force participation is that are you working or looking for work? You know, somewhere the people forgot that in the ages of 15 to 24, you also go to school. So if you're going to school, you're considered not in the labor force. And that is one of the points that made in our paper, that once you adjust for that, the labor force participation rate of individuals in the age group 15 to 24 of women is somewhere around 65%.
Right.
So that is going to now feed into, now they're educated. So if you have 4 years, 5 years of education, you don't get too many jobs. But all of these students are now, you know, the participation rate at secondary school is 80%, then it drops to something like 50% in high school. This is what's going to change in the future and is already happening. The second part about jobs. Now, you know, the Americans are much more, how shall we say, you know, think of themselves as the great doers. They invent things. And so 2016, the US election took place, and suddenly we read in the papers that, listen, you know, fake news and fake analysis, the US invented. Well, I've got news for all of you. Fake news and fake analysis was invented in India. We should be very proud of the fact we invented something. And that was invented in 2014. That is what is going on. This is an election year. We are a vibrant democracy. Part of the cost of a vibrant democracy in this Twitter age, etc., is fake news, and even more is fake analysis. And there's lots of money in it. So there are people who are willing to finance this, and that's why you get the notion that, listen, there are no jobs
So
this
you're
year.
saying the notion that there are no jobs is fake news?
I think, look, for whoever is interested, there's a detailed academic paper on the website, will be in journals, etc., which really establishes the case that the only news that we have is the CMI news, which says that in the last year, the economy lost 3.3 million jobs, lost. In this year of great recovery, where everybody I talk to says they, including in villages or including in rural areas, they can't get workers, including in urban areas, they can't get workers, including in factories, they can't get workers, always good workers, etc. Here's a survey that's saying 3.3 million jobs were lost. One of the interesting features of this survey is that only 1 out of 10 jobs in India today, and Kiran, this is relevant to you, and only 1 out of 10 jobs in India today is held by a woman. This has not been experienced in any society. But here we have, so what did the Indian surveys prior to the CMI say? That, listen, about 25% of all jobs are women. And here we have 10. It's not even in Iran, it's not even in Saudi Arabia. So I ask you to judge in your organizations, in wherever. I go to NDTV, it's all full of women. I don't want to use sort of these ad hoc examples, but the point being, if I look at what goes for fact in India today, only 10 out of 100 jobs in India today is held by, not new jobs, total jobs.
Right.
Is held by a woman.
I just have
something is wrong.
one quick follow-up to that. The reason why people have doubts, you know, over addition of jobs is because a lot of jobs are now getting added into the EPFO data. So there is some skepticism, you know, if these are existing jobs or new jobs, what's happening there?
Okay, there is a huge study available again, done by 2 people, both of whom happen to be called Ghosh. Which goes into this EPFO data in great detail, tries to sort out double counting, eliminate double counting, and their study, just issued a week ago, says that 10 million jobs were created in the last fiscal year. So we have 10 million jobs according to them, sorting out exactly your important point, looking at EPFO data and then extending it to the rest of the economy. There's our study, which says 13 million, and there is the CMI study, which says minus 3 million.
Right.
Now, the unfortunate reality is that we haven't had an official employment survey. That is why, everything goes.
Is that something that you're planning to do at the PME?
And now the survey has just been completed, and starting in October of this year, we will have the government, by the NSSO, will have a quarterly employment survey, and for the rural areas, we'll have an annual survey. So things about data will never, ever be this bad again. And so hopefully in 6 months from now, we won't be talking about my estimate or somebody else's estimate or CMI estimate. We'll be talking about the gold standard, which is the official survey. And let's wait till then.
Right.
So I'm putting my hat in the ring that when that data comes out for 2017-18, it'll be close to what we estimate.
So it's fascinating to hear this conversation between the two of you, right, on jobs. The job scenario is changing completely. And we are still stuck in the old world of measuring who works where, which company, what job. The so-called gig economy is a reality. It's a reality in the IT world at least. And it's being driven by the fast advancement in technology where you possibly cannot have all the talent you need everywhere. So it's becoming more of a shared resource, right? It's also something that appeals to the millennials tremendously. So companies are adapting very fast, right? So the entire scenario of jobs is changing. And when we keep asking, then I think this is where media too has the responsibility to change a bit. Because,
I don't know why everyone blames the media for everything.
I'm saying when you keep asking the same questions, right? We have to ask different questions now. We absolutely, instead of being asked how many computer graduates are going to the IT companies, right? The right question is to ask is how many other industry sectors are hiring? Do you know that in LinkedIn, the companies, the non-IT companies, traditional banking, healthcare, et cetera, the hiring of IT graduates in these companies is 5x faster than hiring of whatever they used to hire, whatever talent they used to hire. That's why I said digitization is not a hype anymore. It's not a jargon anymore. It's changing every fabric of our society. And it's time we internalize that because it's not superficial changes. They are very deep changes, right? They're changing who works where. They're changing things, how long you work in a place. They're changing things like how many companies do you work for at one time, not in your lifetime.
Right.
And until we figure out, sir, how to get surveys to measure these things, I don't have a lot of faith in our surveys and the numbers that keep getting thrown out. But I want to go back to your point. You talked about women, and you talked about, I'm going to put down some real and very recent data in front of you. IT companies at hiring in India, by the way, and we are much better than UK and quite a few of the other Western worlds. At hiring, 50% or 51% of our hiring are women. So more than half of the people we hire are women. Don't clap. Not a happy ending. If you look at the average, it comes down to 34. We are still good. But we are losing. We are losing that 15% or so women that have gone up to the middle ranks.
Right? That's when they start dropping.
Then you go to the senior levels. Around 20, it's a little less than 20 is my guess, but the number today being thrown around is around 20%. I was told it's a respectable number. Yes, when you look at where we were a few years back, I think 2014 or whatever, it was single digit, and now we are to 20%. Of course, it's respectable, it's great. Well, it's not respectable, it's great. We've definitely grown. But 20%, I'm not happy with it. It's a low number still, right? Why should the senior leadership positions just be 20% women? So there's a lot of work that has to be done. And I think one of the fundamental, we all say that when it comes to work, leave your gender behind. Leave your gender out of the door, right? We all believe that's how I've worked, that's how I'm sure you work, Chandra, and that's how everyone works, right? We don't bring our gender to work. But when you look at the life cycle of a woman and a man, there are differences. In a woman's life cycle, she gets married. She has a kid. These are very vulnerable spots in the life cycle of a woman. A man does get married but does not have to shift homes, does not have to do a lot of things that a woman has to do, right? So these are some fundamental differences. Until organizations can factor these in and not see these as weaknesses, gender will continue to be a problem.
Right.
Because this is part of life, this is a fact, and it is not a weakness. It is absolutely not a weakness. There are ways to engage with your women employees who are on leave, who are on maternity leave. There are absolutely ways to engage with them so that when they come back even more productive.
Right.
So I think these are things one
Right.
has to think through.
Right, we have the final 8 minutes. I'm just going to take, final follow-up questions with both of you before we throw it open to the audience. Debjani, the other big game changer is how technology has become so pervasive, and you're seeing multiple disruptions happening at the same time. You have machine learning, you have AI, you have blockchain. What sort of impact is this going to have on economies going forward? Is it an opportunity? Is it a threat? How do you see it?
It's going to disrupt. And when you disrupt something, there's a bit of both. It all depends on how we manage that disruption, right? When new technologies come in, forget new technology for a sec. This is an industrial revolution. At every single industrial revolution starting from steam, there has been disruption. Jobs have got displaced. New jobs have got created. You look at the last 10 years, did we have Uber drivers before that? Did we have social media analysts before that? Did we have social media managers before that? These are all new jobs that have got created in the last 10 years, right? So with the technologies that are coming in now, broadly the AI family, you are going to see disruption, especially the routine jobs that do not need a lot of thinking. We will be much better off automating them because your productivity will go up, your cost will come down, your efficiencies will go up. At the end of the day, going back to what Mr. Bhalla said, it's about the profit, right? But they also will create tremendous amount of new jobs. Data analysts, data scientists, robotics engineers. There's tremendous amount of new jobs that's going to get created. The other beautiful thing that's going to happen is what we say, the move from STEM to STEAM. It's no more about science and tech. Arts comes in. Arts plays a very critical role in science, technology, maths, education, right? So as you do that, you're going to have the coming together of two worlds. And I think that's going to create a tremendous amount of new opportunities and jobs. It's how we manage. As a country, we obsess with job loss. I think it's time we moved the focus and we shifted the conversation to what does it take to create new jobs.
Right. Dr. Bhalla, before I end, just want to ask you, we are also, living in a very complex world today. We are coupled in some aspects, but it's also become more insular. If you look at the tariff wars between US, China, and, the potential impact this could have on India. So where does this leave India as far as that $5 trillion target is concerned?
Okay. Look, trade tariffs, etc., is a new phenomena. The oil price is an old phenomena come again. There's something, these things happen, but they don't really change the underlying fundamentals of each economy relative to the others. So it may be the case world growth goes down, but we are at a very different stage. So China, if you will, is a lot more vulnerable to trade wars. We are not that vulnerable to trade wars at all. So we are at a different stage. But I want to come to and finish with, this digitization. It is absolutely an incredible phenomena happening in the world, happening in India. And this is going, as was mentioned, this is changing the nature of work. So if women have kids, that's a fact of biology. But now they can be at home taking care of the kid and working for an organization because you don't have to be in office space. You can just send it over there. So I think this entire structure is changing and is very, very conducive to women in particular. One last thing on women, and this allows me the time to advertise my book called The New Wealth of Nations. In that, there's a whole study of women directors, a board of directors around the world. The number one economy which provided more directorship jobs to women than any other is India.
Wow.
Okay? Now, let me just explain. It is, in order to be on the board of directors, you have to be educated. So I control for education. And in order to be somewhat on the board of directors, you have to be of certain ability. So you have to be in the workforce. You take care of those two. India is number one. I'll just give you the raw numbers. In the US, the raw number is, not adjusting for anything, only 18% of women on the directorships boards. US, 18%. India, warts and all, is 13% in 2014. So then once you begin to adjust for education, etc., India comes out on top. We have a long way to go. 18% is not good. 12% is not good. 50% is good. But just be amazed. When things change, they change very, very fast. That's the non-linearity that we need to adjust to and acknowledge happens with growth and happens with the transformation, which is what we are undergoing.
All right. On that optimistic note, I'm going to throw it open to the audience in case anyone
we have
has
some
questions.
problem with pigeonhole, so we'll be passing the mic around for you to ask questions. Can we have the questions, please?
See a hand behind. Questions?
Good morning. Thank you for the insights, the guests. One question is, we keep hearing that the majority of the youth is not employable, though they are educated. So what is the government's or the NASSCOM's plan to address this gap?
Right,
Thank
employability in terms of skills.
Yeah. The problem is technology is changing way faster than curriculum and skills are, and I think that's what's creating the problem. Today, engineers that come out or that graduate from our colleges need additional skills in order to contribute from day one to the kind of work that the IT company. I mean, look at the change of scope of work in the IT companies, right? Earlier, you would find one solution, like you would automate payroll, and then you would go scale it, right? Today, you have to work with the end customers, be it automakers, be it hospitals, be it retail chains, etc. And you have to find solutions that completely impact their business cycle, from innovation, from invention to taking it to market, and maybe even services, right? So the nature of work is completely changing. And the kind of people that are required, or the skills that are required, especially people who are familiar with data analysis, people who are familiar with AI, people who are familiar with these technologies, coding is becoming important. So I think while we reshape the education system from schools up to universities to be ready, what is needed is a massive reskilling effort. And that's priority one. In fact, NASSCOM is working with the government. In fact, the Prime Minister himself has been a champion of this initiative. He launched it. It's called Future Skills. Our goal is in the next 4 years to reskill half of this 4 million IT workers in India, to skill 2 million minimum by 4 years, and create a 2 million pipeline in 4 years of university that are trained not on new technologies, but for the new jobs. I mean, we've looked at which are the technologies that will have the immediate impact on jobs in India. There are 9 technologies. With blockchain, it's 10, that will create new job roles. We've identified something like 56 new job roles that are getting created as we speak. So how do you get people reskilled? And it's a massive exercise. For NASSCOM, it's job one, full support of the government to go make it happen. And I think we just have to accelerate that as much as we can.
We'll take 2 more questions.
Yeah, I have the mic. Can I? Thank you. My question to both of you is, where do you see vernacular India in the whole thing? It's less
Brilliant.
than 5% speak English, so where are we?
Vernacular. I'll go first and
didn't quite-
yeah. The whole talk about inclusive growth, we talked a bit about gender, but I think the bigger piece is what you said, which is how do we make technology speak to everyone? And it has to be not just in your language, but we also have to, apart from vernacular local languages, we also have to think about literacy, because they both sort of go hand in hand. And that how do we make technology more intuitive, so that whichever language you're speaking in, whether you're speaking it, whether you're writing it, it can still relate to you, you can build that engagement. And I think that's where there's tremendous amount of work that's needed in India. If there's one area where I would say India should double down the research in AI, it's NLP. I honestly believe that's what's going to bring about a revolution, because it can't be about creating content in so many different languages. You need the ability to create something and then just have it blast out in as many different languages as possible, or understood in as many different languages as possible. So I think, there's a lot of talk of blockchain in India for whatever reason. Everyone talks about blockchain. If I have to pick one technology there, India should, two actually, completely double down and increase capabilities, research, etc. NLP is my first pick, and then of course data science. So
You want
it's
to add to
critical
that,
one.
Dr. Bhalla?
One thing on the future of work, in advanced countries, Denmark, Sweden, and perhaps even the US one day, are now making it such that they provide leave to both men and women when there is a child, and equal time to both, which means both of them can either stay at home and work. So I think this entire notion that only women can take care and they will withdraw from the labor force, etc., is also one fundamental aspect which is undergoing rapid change.
Our maternity law needs to change.
Yes,
It needs to be about family leave, not a woman's leave.
Exactly, which is what is the case in many countries now.
No, we have to do it. We are doing more disservice by not doing it.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, there's one question.
Yeah, ma'am, I have mic. Yeah. Ma'am, my question is, as ma'am said, that women empowerment rate is 51% and decreased to 34%. What is the main reason for such a great fall from 51% to 34%, ma'am?
34, not 24.
34. Yeah, 34.
Yeah.
Are you married?
No. I want the reason for that.
You want the reason, right?
Yeah.
Can you cook?
No, I can't cook.
That's one of the reasons. Do you clean your own house?
Because I have my own sisters and all. So
Doesn't matter. No excuses, boss. If we started giving excuses, the world would stop. So no excuses here. So I think the reason is because we continuously, there are two reasons. One is, we as a society believe the women is the primary caregiver. And show me one rule book where that's written. Why can't men be as good caregivers as women? Right? Maybe we should get cookery classes inculcated into IIMBes and whatever,
Yeah, thank you.
So that's the reason. And the second one also, it's not just India, but globally, I think women are not confident enough still. I mean, there's a shocking piece of data which shows when there's a new job, men will apply even if they're 10% qualified. Women will not apply even if she's 70% qualified. She wants to get to the 90%. And I think as women, we so have to get over that. That's just not acceptable.
If I can add, look, you're absolutely right. There is a thousands of year process in which the male has been the dominant force. And therefore, we are brought up with the idea that we can do anything, and we could. And the women couldn't do anything, and that was also correct because they didn't have education. That's why I keep coming back to, there is nothing to separate a male from a female anymore. But there was thousands of years where there was separation. So it'll take maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years. Even then, it'll be the most rapid improvement.
No, I know it'll take time, but I just think we have to be tremendously impatient. That's the only way it'll happen.
Right. One more question.
I have a question.
I'm going to give it to the lady here. She's been waiting.
Thank you very much. So my question is, we spoke about a lot of women in highly educated women and the women in the corporate and even taking up higher positions. But how about women, probably not very educated but highly skilled, who are at home, and we can have some avenues open for them in terms of starting small-scale industries or use their skills to come up with some of the different things that they can do from within their boundaries, but tapping those skills. So is there something that will really help the economy that we are talking about?
Right. Dr. Bhalla, in fact, I want you to weigh in on this. So, she says we're talking about education, but what about women who may not have formal education but who are very skilled in a particular area? What about opportunities for them to start up something? And, has the whole Skills India initiative been very male-focused and not female-focused? That's been one more criticism, so maybe you can weigh in on that.
The skills focus is akin to arguing that, listen, manufacturing is what is needed in order for us to provide employment, for us to grow, etc. That is one of the fundamental stuff that is undergoing change. On skills, what has been found out, and which is very obvious, that middle-class kids or emerging middle-class kids don't want to go into plumbing or various such activities for which there's an entire apprenticeship system set up in Germany and other countries. Now, plumbing is traditionally thought of, or carpentry is traditionally thought of as a male occupation. All of this is undergoing change. Sports, we just had a session yesterday with Miss Raj, who's the cricket captain, and my first book was on cricket, which was in 1987, and women's cricket wasn't even a speck on the horizon. This is how much the world is changing. So I think all I want to stress is acknowledge that change, and this was mentioned by Guruji in the previous session. It's the delta. For me, the most important analytical, conceptual tool in life is to look at the delta, look at the change. From that, you garner what is going on. And all I'm saying is whatever I say is subject to change, whatever you say, believe, but acknowledge the fact that yes, some women are skilled, don't have education, but there are some men who are skilled who don't have education. So what do we do about that? I think ultimately it boils down to education as an equalizer. That doesn't mean everybody will be equal, because we'll be differentiated by our respective abilities. That's where the world is going to, that the distribution of income will be by your ability, and ability is distributed a lot more equally. The reason there is large inequality amongst men, women, whatever, is because they come with different, not assets, but education being a primary one, and other determinants of income which are now being equalized. That's another reason to think that the world is going to be a much better place.
Right. I'm afraid we're running out of time, so if you have any more questions, please feel free to take them offline. Do you have time for one more?
No, I don't think we have time for any more.
We don't have time for it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Debjani, for those wonderful insights, and hopefully the next time we have a conversation, India would have touched that $5 trillion mark. But thank you so much for talking to us.